Family.
Family. Family. Family. Family. Family.
Family.
Family. Family.
I don't have friends. I got family.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. For the longest time, I've been quite keen on wanting to discuss Warcraft a bit more proper, in a more review-like setting where I spit out my opinions and you either agree, disagree, scream at me in all caps, and find something else entirely to do or say. You know, bring up Garrosh and Thrall and say that the Green Man cheated, you know? Make me mad. But please don't actually do that. I'm begging you. The fact that I'm even joking about this is making me sweat bullets as I speak. But, I mean, he really didn't cheat. Anyways. But, what an expansion it has been, right? I might take my shots at Dragonflight here and there, but otherwise I think I had a pretty decent time with it. Plenty of hiccups and plenty of problems, but for the most part I had a really good time. And I mean that. It actually had some pretty powerful moments that'll stick with me for the coming years of Warcraft and all that other jazz. And as we say goodbye to Dragonflight and welcome War Within and this World Soul saga, I think it's an opportune time to talk about Dragonflight. Like, all of it. The good, the bad, the ugly, and, well, I also think it's very important to discuss its predecessor too. Oh yeah. We're going there. Yeah. Alright. I'll try to make one as quick as possible, as I possibly can. Because what hasn't been said about this particular note in World of Warcraft? Hell, I originally was going to do a full-blown review of this bad boy back in the day, but I didn't want to add the same slop to the big pile of similar slop that almost everyone else had to say about Shadowlands. Shadowlands was broken. More than broken, it broke me, it broke you, probably. It nearly broke Warcraft in some fashion. The lore was all over the place, the setting wasn't my cup of tea, even remotely to drink from, and it might have had one of the worst bad guys in video game history. Feel free to drop who might be worse than Zobold, but yeah, I don't think anyone's gonna top Nipple Man. Goes without saying that Shadowlands left a very sour taste in everyone's mouths. And to preface how we were all feeling about what came next, it was uncertain, very uncertain. I think for many of us, we were worried about just what was next if Shadowlands was the last plate we had just been served. And I don't think we were really ready for seconds. Not with that slop plate, oi. But with a promising development, we are told a return to Azeroth was in sight, and hope started to begin once more. Dragonflight was announced. We were to head to the home of Dragonkind, prior to Northrend. The Dragon Isles. Not the most creative name, but it was something I was more down for. In fact, little known fact that's not in the script, but I just remembered it. The original Dragon Isles was in Classic, and it had a very old god-shaped island for it. None of that really was relevant for Dragonflight, but it is a fun fact to reflect on. You see, as I often do, and still do, I speculated that what came after Battle for Azeroth, back in the day, was the Dragon Isles, as Rathian was looking for them during the events of the Fourth War. So getting that finally confirmed was more than grand, at least for me, as I was utterly disappointed even back then when Shadowlands was first announced, that we were heading to some kind of afterlife. I really cannot stop reiterating how much Shadowlands was just not for me, even from the go. Yeah. But Dragonflight? That was my jam. It was indeed my jam. At least from the premise alone of a more simpler storyline of exploring a whole new unnamed continent. Many also felt like Dragonflight was exactly what Warcraft needed at the time. Anyways, the fact that we were finally getting back into stories with the dragons after a decade of them sitting on the sidelines was another treat altogether. It really just was the storyline I had been asking for a while now. Whether or not it succeeded in that story, well, we'll get to. With the exciting announcement of going to the Dragon Isles, we also got the announcement of ducks. Yes, ducks, one of Azeroth's most elusive creatures, were and now are a thing. And you better like that, because ducks are a thing, and we're gonna shove that down your throat any chance we get. Yeah, okay. So beyond just ducks, we also got a new flying system known as the Dragon Riding, because, you know, we're going to the landscape of dragons. At the time, I was rather uncertain and even skeptical of it, but once you got behind the actual wheel and flew around, it felt great. And still feels great. It really showed just how slow, old, and outdated static flying, or old flying, was. Quite a few crashes, both literal and game-wise, but a welcoming change that will be sticking around for the years to come. The customization, while somewhat limited, was nice, but I will admit the inability to use our other mounts that weren't dragons was deeply missed. Fortunately, in War Within, Dynamic Flying, Dragonflying's new name and technical successor, will allow us to use the mounts that we all missed. Now, as a story guy, I will add, it was definitely a missed opportunity to not make our dragons have a personality, a questline, or arc with us, as we know dragons are very sentient, even at a very young age, and are basically people. So it was kind of weird for us to not really interact with them as such, and just kind of treat them as mounts. But it's a very small point that really doesn't make or break dragon riding. All in all, probably one of the best additions from Dragonflight. As always, a new race or class, and sometimes both, was given to us with the Dracthyr and the new class with the Evokers. Now, Dracthyr can only be Evokers, and Evokers can only be Dracthyr, right now, at least. So, you were kinda just locked into one race class combo. Dracthyr were the creations of Neltharion, who had made this draconic mortal-like species in secret many years ago, and gifted them the powers of each of the Dragonflights in some fashion. Initially, they were created to help the fight against the Incarnates, who were locked away after a mishap with Rasz'geth. And later on, the Incarnates were also locked away by Neltharion and the other dragon aspects. Abyssian and Rathian, as well as Nozdormu, aided in helping the newly awakened Dracthyr to this new world and new Azeroth, one without Neltharion or Deathwing in it. One where they were left to choose what place they wanted to be in the world, for good or for ill. My thoughts on the Dracthyr are quite mixed, with a lot of things in Dragonflight. Well, I think the lore behind them is extremely fascinating and very fitting, especially since Neltharion Deathwing, a fan favorite of mine, who definitely would tinker at a draconic race like this, who would wield all the power of the flights, and you could even say this is like almost a precursor to the Dragon Soul that he would eventually build. Also the Dark Heart, apparently. We'll get into that thing. But in terms of like the design of the Dracthyr, I thought they appeared way too slim and not big and broad as they probably should or could be. Not saying the slim look didn't work, it just wasn't for me. I'm a big orc fan. I like my boys and gals extra thick and buff. Would have been nice to have that. Additionally, they are dragons. Dragons have the ability to make visages of whatever mortal race or creature that they like, and unfortunately Dracthyr are locked behind this weird blend of elven, human, draconic-like appearances. Major, and I mean major, missed opportunities to not give them the looks of the races of their decided faction, of the Alliance and Horde. Personally, I still would have probably made mine either Elven, Tauren, or Troll, but not allowing people to opt into that was such a miss. The Dracthyr's overall arc, world building, and story was also quite lacking, as their racial leaders outside of Emberthal really didn't do much, and their antagonistic leader Sarkareth didn't get enough screen time. Someone who we'll talk on later, as will be a very repeated point. I really think and wish that the Horde Council and Alliance leaders will open the new race more openly and with more bombastic introduction as the Pandaren or Goblins sort of got. The starting zone wasn't much better, as I don't think it did the Dracthyr much justice, as it felt more like an opener to Dragonflight's overall story, rather than their own isolated story that could focus on them, their culture, their people, and their overall plights. Not that it was bad, it's just not very memorable either. I would have loved something akin to the Demon Hunter storyline, where the first half could have had Neltharion, your father and creator, send you on the very mission that would later have you be put to rest for a long ass time. The cutscenes were nice, but felt more targeted towards Emberthal, who in my opinion is the Dracthyr's best character, who had an arc, but also not enough screen time. Reoccurring theme, as we'll come to know. Overall, the Dracthyr are a nice new addition, but feel also rather forgotten about in the grand scheme of it all, and could have been better utilized in more zones, patches, and their own factions. They also could have had more classes from the go, and also more options, as they were so limited in what they could wear and look like. Won't be focusing too much on all of the quests and storylines, but the overall story of each of the zones was pretty decent, albeit not my favorite of the franchise. Very beautiful though, in terms of scale and look and all that. Very beautiful looking zones. Waking Shores is the first placement that we arrive in from our very fashionable and new Horde gunships. I love those a lot. Or our simple Kultiran travel ships. Sorry Alliance, you lost on that one here. Here we help out against the new, or rather old, Primalist threat. Yeah, old, we'll get to that. Who attempted to revert the changes done to their draconic eggs in the care of the Red Flight, who along with the Black Dragonflight call this place home. As apparently the Titans, well we already know this, the Titans made alterations to the dragons, the proto-dragons, to make them the dragons we know today. The Waking Shore is very much where dragons of all shapes and sizes lay their eggs and they hatch and are born, hence the waking part. Now, while this is my second favorite zone, the Red Flight definitely could have done more. I liked the sacrifice of Sendrex, whom we befriend our adventures to save an egg that doesn't really go anywhere. Much like the Dragon Oath Stones, which we turn back on after regaining each of the Dragonflight Oaths to the Titans in each of the zones. It's somewhat the goal of each of the zones, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Alexstrasza taking the fights to Raszageth was awesome to witness, and it's something I wish we got more of, especially in their dragon forms. And Rathian coming in to save the day, also a plus. I'd say the main intrigue for me in this story and zone was definitely the Black Dragonflight and their own storyline, where we got the long-awaited return of Sibelian and his remnants of Black Dragons that he had been recreating on Outland for over a decade, which marks the return of an entire flight that was close to extinction pretty much. There was only 3 males, as far as we knew, after the events of Cataclysm, as Sibelian, Rathian, and Abyssian were originally the last trio left, but all of that changed thanks to Sibelian. And it's welcomed and even a believable change since we saw Black Dragon whelps all over the Bladish Mountain and Burn Crusade around Sibelian. Unfortunately, this is also the start to Rathian and Sibelian's campaign to outdo each other to become the Earth Warder, which does become a thing later on, and is something I've talked about and will talk about again later. But it's a crack in the story which we'll address. Waking Shore was definitely a good start to Dragonflight, and it's helped heavily by the focus of Rathian and Sibelian and the Black Dragonflight, to me at least. I liked them a lot. I love seeing Sibelian again. He is a fan favorite of mine alongside Rathian, who is also a fan favorite. Before I go further, I want to talk about an Elec in the room, that is the Primalists Djradin. The Primalists Djradin are our primary antagonists, who are subservient to the Incarnates. Little is known about both, but the Primalists have apparently been a faction that have existed since the Incarnates first warred with the Dragonflights thousands of years ago. They are mortals that are devoted to the elements, the Primalists, the Incarnates, and so on and so forth. I don't know why I called the Primalists the Incarnates, but you know, scripting. And it's hard to really believe, in my opinion. I could believe them being a faction that is newly created when the Isles first open, or it's a faction recreated based on the old ways and ideals, but it's extremely hard to believe that they've existed this whole time in secret. They also weirdly feel like a diet version of the Twilight's Hammer, but are more, I guess, healthy in their relationship with dragons and elements, so that's good, I guess. Especially since our only window in the lore for them before the events of Dragonflight was the vagueness of Kurog, Magatha's late apprentice, whom is quickly dealt with and only shown in the Forbidden Reach, freeing Razagath and setting this whole thing off. He's very important, and he, like so many others, really could have benefited from being in the Ohn'arhran Plains or the Azure Span as a big-time antagonist within the zone, before his ultimate defeat in the Vault of the Incarnates. I also would have linked Magatha as maybe a progenitor of the Primalists maybe in their return, potentially even have her be the one to spark its return from the old stories of her ancestors maybe. Still time to do that, I suppose, in whatever comes next in Last Titan and Midnight and War Within. Meanwhile, the Djradin, the other ones, are the giant dragon hunters. We mostly fight in the Waking Shores in their quest to, of course, fight dragons. They're very one note and apparently just went docile when the dragons, I guess, left. It's kind of a plot hole, makes me question why they didn't fight the Draconids on the island that stayed behind, or even attempted to free the Incarnates from their cells, who were just kind of lounged about and didn't really have much guardians to begin with. I mean, they had an alliance with the Incarnates, why didn't they help free them? I guess they just were really bored and had nothing to do. They might very well be one of Warcraft's weakest enemies. I've little praise to give them with how little depth they really have, sadly. Definitely very weak antagonists, but are at least helped by the Incarnates, for the most part. I don't know. Not the biggest fan of them. On reflection of the Djradin, of them just not doing anything while the dragons were away, guess they were just bored, there really does lie a problem with how there weren't many stories involved with the fact that a landmass was locked away and was invisible to us. I almost think it could have been better if the dragons used their special abilities to lock the isle up in endless dreams and in time, then something went awry with one of those, maybe? As in Pandaria, similarly, also was locked away in the mists, was unseen by others because of the last Emperor's dying breath, and it sealed the whole landmass and hid the land for their safety and for them to have more time, rather than be engulfed by the sundering that was caused by the War of the Ancients and all the other stuff with the Well of Eternity. The dragons chose to hide their land as well when they went to war against the Burning Legion, and somehow took their entire flights with them. I just don't really like that explanation or world building. I think it could have been far more compelling if we had some dragons stay behind and a better reason as to how it was hidden. It's just, it's very janky at best. I don't have a lot to really express here besides, you know, a little bit of disappointment that there wasn't much of a focus there like we had gotten with Pandaria. Alright, back to the starting zones, or not, well, they are starting zones, I guess. The Ohn'arhran Plains, which are the home of the Green Dragonflight and the Centaur tribes of the region. Very grassy feel that gave off very Nagrand and Mogar-like vibes, so I dig it. Here we learn quite a bit about their culture and their own conflicts, and the Primalist and Nukhud tribe. This was, unfortunately, my least favorite zone, at least story-wise. In terms of, like, the way it looked, it was beautiful, and I love that bit. But it could have benefited to have more to do with the Green Dragons here. I think it focused way too much on the Centaur. The Centaur stuff was fine, and I liked that we got a very healthy focus in world-building and their cultures. But the addition of them being separate tribe that predated Thaldraszus' own children was odd. Not unbelievable, it just was something I wish that was both addressed and given more focus on. Like, what were their origins besides just being a friendly centaur tribe? And also, they mentioned the other warring tribes on Kalimdor's continent, and those guys got wiped out, I guess. At some point, it's not elaborated on. It's very weird world building that feels very jagged and just, it's not good retconned lore, in my opinion. The antagonists were also kind of forgettable, although Koraleth, the Primalist leader, was interesting, but again, not enough screen time, a repeated notion. and was focused on later with her family ties after her death. Easily could have been part of the Primal Council or a continuous antagonist who took over the Primalists when Kurog was later dealt with. Also, the lack of hunter involvement, or the unseen past lack of involvement, was kinda staggering. Despite Ohn'arhran, the Hunter Order Hall's basic god and icon, being very present within the zone here, again, Ohn'arhran Plains, Ohn'arhran, the Centaur were led here by Ohn'arhran, I just get a very strong vibe that many of the stories in the zone were heavily scrapped or changed, which isn't uncommon for any expansion, but the fact that I can kind of tell isn't a good effect it should be giving off. Overall though, like I said, beautiful zone, but I feel like Val'sharah handled itself better as a close-range place to the Emerald Dream. It's just, for an expansion called Dragonflight, it should have more stories to deal with the dragons, especially the green dragons, and what they're dealing with after Ysera fell. The Azure Span is the home of the blue dragons, Tuskarr, and gnolls within the region. Now, this is my favorite zone on the Dragon Isles, both in looks and narrative setting. I love snowy zones, and overall, the feeling of Grizzly Hill vibe that it got was great. Appreciate that. Love it. The story is also quite good, as it tackles the folly of the blue dragonflight and connects that with the community of the Tuskarr people, who are quite wholesome and give such a warm feeling all around, and it just has a very healthy way of handling death that is elaborated on later with the blue dragons. They also bring back Khadgar and his theme music. Oh. And the Kirin Tor to help out against the Primalist threat along with Raszageth. This is a return of a now major fan favorite for me. Again, new fan favorite, I should say. I didn't really care too much about her during Wrath of the Lich King, but Sindragosa in her Visage form, and the stories that tell with her, I loved her overall vibe and feeling. I really would want her to return. She kind of fades out at the end of her storyline, but they want to bring her back, go right ahead. Maybe it's nostalgia bait all around, but this was and is Dragonflight at its strongest. With the return of the surviving blue dragons, well, not everyone, but we'll get there, taking the fight to Raszageth, including Senegos. Seriously, this zone might have changed my overall tune to the blue dragonflight and Kalecgos as a whole, which is extremely important as to how and why I praise it, if it can do that with its overall story. However, it's not perfect. The Gnoll plot really doesn't go anywhere right now, as the blighting of everything in sight just doesn't really do anything. I assumed it was going to have something to do with Galakrond's return or something, or Rudikron's schemes, but nope, dropped. And Raszageth, whom I've mostly avoided in talking about, begins to show her cracks as villain here. I've expressed my agitation with her character when it comes to letting her prey live for very little good reason. An issue that seems to be repeated in her predecessor Zovul, and also her successor with Farak. And while Farak does have a somewhat better reason for why he does it, it's still not good. It's still not a good... I hate that they keep doing a villain just lets us live for no good reason besides underestimating us. It's not a good plot. I just don't like it. Sometimes it's just done randomly. And she does do this, to my memory, at least 3 times within Dragonflight, with Rathian twice, and us here with the arrival of the Blue Dragons, whom she could take on or at least finish Kalecgos. Also, she kind of does it earlier with Rathian and Alexstrasza. Again, it's just, you should have her kind of just try to finish us off and give a better reason. At least with the Blue Dragon one, it has the Blue Dragonflight there to back Kalecgos up, but I don't think the Blue Dragonflight and Senegos can take down Raszageth. I think that she definitely could wipe us out here. Despite my grievances with Raszageth here, it is still peak Warcraft and peak Dragonflight. Still very good. Azure Span was and is certainly one of the better, if not best zones in Dragonflight. I just love me some snowy places. Just, I'm gonna miss Azure Span. The fact that we have no snowy zones going into War Within, tragic. Tragic. Lastly, Thaldraszus. Thaldraszus is the home of the Bronze Dragonflight and is also where the Vault of the Incarnates is held, as well as the capital city. Which, it exists. Yeah, that right there, that's a city. Here, we mostly go on a time adventure all over the place, with the biggest highlight being the Black Empire at its early stage on Azeroth, and N'Zoth potentially getting a glimpse at his own future, and could plan accordingly to it, and could return maybe because of it. The best moment from this was definitely the heart-to-heart between Nozdormu and Chromie, and her mission to prevent Murozond. It's actually one of Chromie's better moments, I'd say. She has good moments. Murozond, by the way, being Nozdormu's eventual fate of creating the infinite Dragonflight. Another plot thread that we will be discussing, later on within the video. A bit of a hit and miss zone, but not horrendous either. I don't have a lot to say about it, but I recall at least having a good laugh with the jab of us returning to the starting zone. So, overall, good times. See what I did there? Something I've not had the chance to gush about, and I'll take the chance to now, is in the times of this writing, when I was reflecting on the moment between Nozdormu and Chromie, I remembered, oh, right. This was the expansion where the cutscenes started to utilize some of that new model technology of giving really good lip syncing and higher budget cutscene. For a while, we really just relied on the in-game models and their emos for cutscenes. Nothing really wrong with that, I do it with Machinima, but a game changer did occur in Shadowlands where they experimented with something new and something different. And it definitely makes Warcraft feel more lively and also just less dated, and it's something I really enjoyed and have definitely gotten used to as Dragonflight has continued. Cinematic team, you did a wonderful job, and that's gotta be stated 1,000 times over. As somebody who makes Machinima on the side, it's always lovely to see how far we've come since Cataclysm or Pandaria's own cutscenes. I'm really looking forward to seeing how much we can take this beyond in the World Soul Saga, and yeah, definitely excited for whatever you guys do with the cutscenes in War Within. Our first raid for Dragonflight was the aforementioned prison, the elusive Primal Incarnates. Focusing less on the gameplay aspect of this was the prison created by Neltharion and the Titan Keepers to keep the Incarnates, a group of powerful primal proto-dragons who rivaled the Aspects with their elemental powers. They were each placed here rather than killed for their beliefs in how they viewed how the Titans had corrupted their race and their planet. They weren't killed because they used to be friends with the Aspects, and it was really hard for them to kind of just, end them. They were family, they were friends. Notably, I wanted to say that in the original interpretation of what the Incarnates were going to be, they were going to be some cult followers of Galakrond and his own beliefs, but that seemingly changed much earlier on than I expected, and they're kind of more of their own thing, which I definitely prefer. And here, within the Vault of Incarnates, we face off against the Primalist forces and try to stop Raszageth in an epic fight and conclusion from freeing her other siblings. Ultimately, Raszageth does succeed and unleashes each of these Primal Incarnates to the world after her own demise. If you want a more in-depth talk about each of the Primalists, I've done a video discussing them all. Now the trio, or once quartet, are now unleashed on the world, and the Aspects are quite shaken by this development. Mainly by Eroticrons. Not only that, but they are proven to be knowledgeable, formidable, and intelligent as they scour one of Neltharion's bases for the Dark Heart, an object that will quickly become important for later. And they utilize Sarkareth's group of Dracthyr to act as their distraction when unraveling Abyss from its earthy depths. Instantly, we get a very good idea of each of the Incarnates and what they're about, even though we're very unfortunately given not much screen time with each of them. Varnoth is cool and calculated, Varak is the hot-headed and crazed one, and Eroticron is the intelligent leader of the group. Each has a stake in why they do what they do, and are quite honestly the best part of Dragonflight. and each of them just has beef with the Titans. Vyranoth has more beef regarding what they did to their children. Ohn'arhran seems to just revel in the war. Farak wants power and control, but Vyranoth was in it because of what they were doing to her eggs, to her kin's eggs. She was not happy with that. At least to me, I was glued to their antics and wish we had gotten to bear witness their interactions with each other far more. At least there's a novel with Scaleborn which focuses on them a great deal there, and their visage forms are phenomenal and easily beat their draconic forms, for the most part. My personal favorite, Ohn'arhran, really shines the most as someone who once rivaled Neltharion and doesn't think we're to be underestimated. A refreshing take on an antagonist who finally notes how much of a threat the champions really are. Their beef with the dragon aspects feels genuine, and their overall hatred for the Titans also makes plenty sense. The whole addition of the Incarnates is definitely a positive addition to the story, adding things to story that makes sense for the overall world. Love that. Really love that. As I've reiterated time and time again, it's a shame we didn't get much time with them as we could have. At least with Vyranoth and Ohn'arhran, they are both still active, and Farak, even though he died, could potentially come back, given his whole relationship with the Firelands seemingly after eating up Smolderon, the former Firelord. All in all, a return to some wonderful baddies in Warcraft after a time of many misses. One of the first in a surprising long list of mini patches was the return to the Reach. No, not that Reach. This one is not nearly as depressing as that one. So yes, we ultimately returned to the Forbidden Reach shortly after the Incarnates got what they wanted from it. Rysgath, whose storm had initially caused the area to be uninhabitable, was fading, and Sarkareth and his Sunder Flame would make their own move to uncover the Reach's secrets to start their own war against Dragonkind and the rest of Azeroth. This mainly focuses on Emberthal and the missing Black Dragon brother, Abyssian, and their own relationship, as Emberthal realizes she'll have to fight her own kind, which sadly doesn't really go anywhere, I will admit now. But even with those future faults, it's a very good precursor for everything of what is to come in Dragonflight. I particularly loved the heart-to-heart between Abyssian and Emberthal, and the overall vibe of the Reach was good. While I remember, and while I'm here, what the hell was up with these bugs here? They're very clearly some kind of Akir race, right? Right? They even almost resemble the Mantid. Why didn't we get anything with them and their culture? Ugh. Too many missed opportunities here, I swear. It's really bugging me. Alright, we're finally onto the first patch, Embers of Neltharion. As the name suggests, this focuses on the literal and figurative remnants of Neltharion, the former Black Dragon who would go on to become Deathwing. For all talks about sequel expansions, I will say that Dragonflight does feel like a sequel, or at least a sibling expansion to Cataclysm, focusing on dragons, elementals, and even the Druids of the Flame. Yeah, lots of similarities there. Here, the hidden caverns that Neltharion used for his own many experiments are ultimately located and found by the Incarnates, who discovered it with the help of the Darkheart, as I had mentioned earlier. Which at the time we just perceived as nothing too major. The plan here by them is just to use the Sundered Flame, who've been following them, so they're going to use them as a distraction. While Farak devours the Shadow Flame pool that Neltharion had created within the place, which apparently was also one of the many things that pushed him further down his corrupted path into becoming Deathwing, Vyranoth and Ohn'arhran kinda just do their own thing. I will say, it was and is a missed opportunity to exactly pinpoint what exactly the two were doing during this time, during this whole distraction bit. Was this when Ohn'arhran forged his alliance with Xal'Atath or the Infinites? Did Vyranoth just go on a holiday while Farak ate flame drugs? Again, nothing major like I said, but I just want to see the trio more. They really are a fascinating bunch. The opening of these caverns draws in both the Dracthyr and the Black Dragonflight, as therein lies some form of curse or an echo. Yes, the echo is, as I said, rather literal, although I guess it was more of the embers, not the echo. Ah well. Now, we learn later it's not actually Neltharion's echo, but instead it's just a faceless one, more tied in with the void. How and why this is, and why Neltharion has a rift to the void, is never really revealed and explained. Again, missed opportunity. Apparently, it's the source of power that Sarkareth chases after that Neltharion promised to his heir. Along the way, as mentioned, the Black Dragons, namely Abyssian, Rathian, and Sibelian, come down to investigate the legacy of their flights. I've certainly talked about their arcs before on this channel, but I'll keep it short here. Sibelian and Rathian both are pining for the role of Earthwarder. Along the way, they realize, as such, that their legacy is just not for them, and that it just leads to death. Because of this, Abyssian takes the title because nobody else wanted it, and yeah. It's most certainly not the storyline I wanted, nor really did I like it. I really did not like this route, actually, as Abyssian really didn't earn that title through his actions. Meanwhile, it's characters like Sibelian who brought life back into their flight on Outland, and Rathian who upheld the duty of the Earthwarder by safeguarding the world in his own way, and taking down the likes of N'Zoth through research and action. Again, we have Rathian to thank for the fact that we were able to even stop N'Zoth. The most we got was a guiding hand from Abyssian to Emberthol, and at times with Rathian and Sibelian. They do somewhat play with an idea that I had with the three brothers, where they lead their flight together, though not a council. Instead, they have Sibelian as the military leader, Abyssian as their dragon aspect, and Rathian as their ambassador. But I really would have switched around Rathian and Abyssian's roles here. I get that Rathian made several mistakes and is just a Drake, but he proved many times over that he's more than his mistakes, and more than just a young dragon. And having Abyssian and Sibelian help guide him here would have added to that inexperience, you know, or I suppose would give him experience in the long run. The story, over the years, at least to me, really was shaping Rathian to be the Earthwarder, to be the Black Dragon aspect someday, especially since his Drake and Dragon forms resemble that of Neltharion himself. Is it fan service? Yes, but I think it's fan service done right. But no, we're gonna give it to Abyssian because he's nice and does no wrongs. I liked Abyssian, I really did, but his take no action stance got old so fast, and was never really amended. That was additionally one of his largest flaws that Emberthol points out at the start of this arc, that he was a black dragon who would prefer to not get involved with his flight and the rest of the world, instead he'd stay in High Mountain. And do we see him ever change that stance? Do we see him take action, finally, with his flight? No, we do not. It's extremely frustrating since the Black Dragons are and remain my favorite flight, but in the end we got a flop with their aspect storyline. At the very least, Rathian isn't tied down to this role, I guess, but I'd argue the Earthwarder is such an active role it would make perfect sense to have him remain active in defending our world. But I'll take Rathian as an ambassador if it means more stories with him. Maybe they'll correct the mistakes of Abyssian by making him more active, but I've got my doubts. Sibelian, though, he's a good lad, problematic older brother at times, sure, but the fact that he fought through the flight's corruption through sheer force of will over the years on Outland and so on, that's just badass. But he gets better, and his bond with Rathian, though slowly changed, was definitely among my favorites. Never got that reunion between Rexxar and him, though, so, you know, that's always a shame. As for Sarkareth and his Sundered Flame, I'm glad that their storyline was wrapped up, but it was a little odd that the focus wasn't really on Farak, or the Echo of Neltharion instead, as they ultimately felt like the larger threat at the time, not the Sundered Flame. I did like and prefer, though, that they followed the legacy of Neltharion, and, you know, through Sarkareth, of him, like, becoming just like his father, a corrupted monster, through a Dracthyr, through Sarkareth, rather than Sibelian, whom I was very worried that they were going to be treading that, given he almost relapsed on his corruption when he got blasted by the Shadow Flame by Farak. It was a much better idea to do this with Sarkareth, definitely, and I will applaud them for that move. The tackling that they did here, though, worked out quite well with how much his legacy, Neltharion's legacy, just lined up with corruption and failure. It worked with the Dracthyr, Black Dragons, and even with Farak, whom believes he can master the Shadow Flame that Neltharion never could. Yeah, good luck with that. Quite a few missed opportunities, which is a theme for this expansion it seems, but all in all, it was an alright patch with a very, very lousy conclusion on who becomes the next Earth Warder. I remain firm that that was definitely a flop, a breaking point for me for this expansion, but didn't lose me at least. Before I jump into with the next small patch, I'd like to go over one of the probably best parts of Dragonflight, and that was the sheer focus on small questlines. There were mainly their own stories that had some dealings with the main plot, but also not really. And I will say this with a very straight face, some of these were some of the best character-driven and world-building stories that we have gotten in such a long time. From the gathering of their entire remaining blue dragons all across the globe, from the Jade Forest, Crystal Song, Booty Bay, and Nexus, and even Theramore, letting Malygos and Shiragosa finally get their rest after a lifetime of sorrow, something I hope that we get for Neltharion and Sinestra someday. So, it was just so damn good, and the touch-up of having Senegos finally die peacefully, I was sad. I definitely was sad. We said goodbye to some beloved characters in that questline. As well as the beef of Bane dealing with his trauma against the Centaur of this continent as they kill his savior and friend Bovan, and Bane ultimately takes action against them. Something we've wanted for our usual peace-loving Tauren leader is him just going apeshit, and he did. Not only did we get that, but we finally got the Founders of Durotar reunion after almost 2 decades of waiting. Holy moly. Yes, we finally got Rexxar, Chen, Rokon, Bane, and of course Misha all together to mourn their friend Bovan in the same location. It was probably one of the top tier moments for me in Dragonflight. I don't care about anything else. This is what made the expansion great. I'd be down to see them all gather up again on some kind of mission for the Horde and for Thrall. Have them kind of be like the Horde's like Black Ops team or something. This, along with the retaking of Gelneus finally, the peace that the Dragonma Elder got, Turnus dealing with the loss of her sister and lamenting how she wanted to change that, the formation of Tyr's new guard and unlocking his memories, Vironoth giving Odin the middle finger and taking his Stormdrakes from his grip, the Eridar joining the Alliance after a quick return to Argus, and of course the very personal and touching scene between you and Veristraz. And so on and so forth. We really were treated well with so many of these kinds of quests, and I dearly hope we see this kind of trend continue with War Within and beyond, because this was good. These were good. A surprise to be sure, but a welcome one, was the return of the Heritage Armors. Heritage Armors, if you forgot or didn't know, were those segmented questlines of following a story for our race to gain a unique cosmetic armor, and were originally added in Battle for Azeroth. To me, they are, and still remain, one of the best new additions in World of Warcraft. And I was shocked we really didn't see them continue at all in Shadowlands. But boy oh boy, did we get them back, and we got them back with a vengeance. The stories got better, the armors got better, we got cutscenes for each of them, we even got hints to a war revamp and so much more. The return to the Orcs' holiday of the Kosharg, of them all gathering their clans and being on Azeroth all together, remains the best of the bunch. Something I talked about in-depthly like last year or almost a year ago. Who's keeping track? I'm not. It gave us a gathering of so many familiar faces, new ones and old ones, and a hint that Durotar may finally gain a large oasis, forever changing its landscape. It was so grand and so good, I even had to make a machinima of it because of how much I loved it. We also got some battling with the Scarlets with the Forsaken, with them driving off from their lands, Maiev retaking a Night Elf settlement in Felwood, the Draenei's own gathering back on Azeroth and the announcement of a new city being made, and welcoming the Broken and the Minari to join them, the handling of a relic that Onyxia once had and the remnants of the Fias against the humans, the Darkspears being further united by Rokhan by re-establishing old ties with Alola and Stranglethorn. I cannot stress just how much they perfected the heritage armors for the races in Warcraft. This is how you do it. And I have to wonder what lies ahead with these sorts of stories. Will they continue? Will we see them in a new format that aren't heritage armors, but like, I don't know, some other way of doing it with, you know, kind of like the Blood Elf one that they gave us in Shadowlands. The only two races that remain now are the Pandaren and the Dracthyr, who have yet to get their heritage armors, and I'm excited to see just what they cook up for those two. If there is anything to take away from Dragonflight at all, that they nailed this right. I am blown away at how well they did things here, and it makes me excited for a future if this is the precedent that they set for racial storylines. Okay, steering away from the other storylines now, we have the focus on the Bronze Dragonflight as they come to grips with the inevitability of Nozdormu becoming Murzond. Through the machinations of Dios and Ohn'arhran, they attempt to force a proto-dragon variant of Nozdormu before he becomes Aspect by becoming his darker self, becoming that darker leader of the Infinites. This is of course not how Nozdormu became our Murzond or the Murzond that we dealt with so long ago in the End Time. We of course deal with him and make sure that Dios fails, but more interestingly, this almost never happens as we actually stop Ohn'arhran first from taking Galakrond's power into that Dark Hearts that we've been mentioning a lot. But it becomes quite clear that we cannot stop them both, and Chromie opts into saving Murzond instead of defeating Ohn'arhran. Something clearly that is going to bite us as Ohn'arhran manages to get away and deliver this relic into the hands of Xal'Atath, the Harbinger. Ohn'arhran vows that we will see him again, but only when it's time to take the Titans down, who are clearly his true goal and his true enemies, leaving his two siblings to fight his war for him against the dragons. Nozdormu is ultimately saved, and Murzond doesn't seem to be a reality anymore. Or does he? Bum bum bum. Yes, this is called the Dawn of the Infinite, which means the start of their whole thing, and there lies plenty of reasoning to assume Nozdormu is still bound to become Murzond, especially since he kind of has to in a constant sort of way. It's gonna melt your brain a bit, as time travel always does mine. But essentially Nozdormu is, in the future, becomes Murzond, which prevents past Nozdormu from doing anything. He then has the Champions of Azeroth kill him, his future self, and he retrieves the Dragon Soul from the past to defeat Deathwing. Therefore, for a lot of the past that we've come to know over the years to happen, Murzond has to happen. So the only way that Deathwing is defeated is if Murzond is also defeated along the way. Again, a lot of brains to melt here, I know, and the Infinite Dragonflight are also still a thing, which implies that they still have to happen. It's one big loop that has to occur. Ultimately, I really like this story. Biased, I know. I like Ohn'arhran to pieces. But it becomes one massive plot hole that I don't particularly like. They could get away with saying Murzond was just an alternate Nozdormu, but I have a hard time wrapping around that with my head as well. So for right now, I hope this is just a start to the Infinite storyline and not a close to it. Again, runs the risk of really just ruining the end of their patch's storyline with that conclusion. The stuff with the Ohn'arhran though, beautiful. Alright, one of the hooks that we saw with Conclusion or Epilogue with Tyrande and the Night Elves was the gift of the potent and powerful seedling that is the Night Elves' new world tree, as the souls that fell on Thaldraszus are basically formed from it, or form into it. This would be, I suppose, the MacGuffin or glue. I'm not sure what to exactly call it here, but it ties everything together. It's to be the new home of the Night Elves, and because of its potency, it is wanted by the Primalists and the Incarnates. I actually do like that the world tree, particularly this one, is so powerful it can have consequences. Definitely on purpose, as Amidrassil was the same way. If Archimonde had successfully drained its power, because it was, you know, birthed from a small well of eternity that Illidan made, it was heavily connected to Azeroth and her own world soul, so if you drain the tree, you drain Azeroth. Along with this was the weird addition of having Malfurion switch places with Ysera in Ardaweald, which added nothing and became a big question of just why. As Ysera doesn't really do anything after the switch, like, it's nice to have her back, but we didn't really even get to interact with her, and she didn't get to interact with really that many characters either. It'll certainly remain firm that it was odd to remove the Night Elves from Kalimdor still and have their new home in the Dragon Isles, but at least we're given the promise that Thaldraszus might return someday, and that the other places around the globe are still integral to them, so I don't really think that's as much of a problem now, but it still feels weird to have them in the Dragon Isles nonetheless. Coming closer now to the end, we have the Fury of the Incarnates, which, I don't know if that's the right name this time, guys. Fury of the Incarnate, maybe? Or the Primal Division? Look, this is where Vyranoff and Farak split, and Farak makes a deal with the Druids of the Flame. Now, the return of the Druids of the Flame, after all this time, bent on their old dreams of wanting to be immortal like they once were, and working for the elemental proto-dragon god of fire alongside the already elementally devoted Primalists, that actually works and is awesome, and is a good plot point to use them to get into the Emerald Dream. I love that. Farak wanting to use a powerful world tree to reshape the world into a realm of fire. Yeah, sounds about right. And him having squabbles with not just Vyranoff, but Ohn'arhran too. I kind of like that the Incarnates had a divide, mainly with Farak causing it. But Vyranoff switching sides because Farak abuses a green dragon? What? Did we miss something? This is the same Ice Queen who was thrilled to the prospect of Neltharion's heirs tearing each other apart. The Dracthyr, the Black Dragons, she's okay with them butchering each other, but she doesn't like it if it's a green dragon? Why is she suddenly so against that now? I can kind of see her realizing the insanity of Farak, and that kind of drives her off, and at least she doesn't drop her qualms about the Titans after she bails, but I gotta admit, she switched sides way too quickly, to the point where I thought she was a spy or a double agent. Nope, turns out she had a soft heart and not an ice one after all. I'm not against her turning good and having her rekindle her old friendships and with Alexstrasza, but it was very surreal. I suppose I just wanted to see more of her villainous side before that switch. I'll admit, seeing her be the first one troubled by Raz's death made me think she might turn at some point, but even so, I think that it was done way too quickly here. At this point, it feels appropriate to say around this time that a lot of the stories that we were getting felt very rushed, and that we were missing bits and parts. Like, it seemed like we definitely cut some stuff out to make ends meet, I guess. Alright, we're coming to a close. We have the conclusion where Farak attempts to make Azeroth in his image by setting Amidrassil to the flame, even gathering forces from the Firelands to do so. Yeah, Ohn'arhran kinda just helps along and then dies after being betrayed. Ohn'arhran, more like Smoldergon, am I right? Yeah, that was, Anyways, he does this by forging an entirely new weapon, which he's had the Djradin help him build that can create a rift between both the Firelands and the Emerald Dream. A weapon you can get, by the way, and it doesn't do that. Really? Make me do all this hard work to get this legendary axe that is capable of creating these cool rifts between the Emerald Dream and the Firelands, and you're not gonna make us have the ability to tear into the, have a little portal there? We even see Farak doing it. Okay. My gripes with a legendary axe I don't even have aside, the conclusion of the Emerald Dream is quite fine. Some cheesiness here and there, but the arrival of the champions from around the globe to pay homage to the defense of Amidrassil back in Warcraft 3, I dig it. I really dig it. Everyone is here. I think it definitely could have used a bit better build-up to it prior, like having you gather everyone outside the Emerald Dream. Could have been nice, add to the big moment, maybe have some voice acting, or like even a cutscene of us doing it. That would have been cool. That would have been a really cool montage. I suppose my biggest gripe that the long-awaited journey into the Emerald Dream doesn't exactly feel or pan out like the Emerald Dream exactly. Like, it does and it doesn't. I just didn't get the vibes as I did when we entered it briefly in other expansions. Here, it feels more like a new islands than it does an entirely, like the realm of the Emerald Dream. It's pretty and serene and captures that Emerald Dream feeling for sure, and it does give some of the wild gods some justice. Could have used more Loa though. The Night Elves get their home back, the Horde and Lions help to found a world tree, Farak is seemingly defeated, though could come back. It's big, and the aspects get their powers back. They're ultimately restored. Yeah, the aspects. Let's talk about them and that real quick. Okay. You know, for an expansion called Dragonflight, I really didn't get a very dragon-esque expansion feel. Like, yeah, there are dragons everywhere, and I do think we definitely reached our dragon quota for the most part, definitely. Most assuredly. I'm not saying we didn't have dragons, we did. But boy oh boy did the dragon aspects not get very dragon-y moments. And I pin that a lot to the fact that they relied heavily on the visages. I do think that that had more to deal with, that it was easier to do that in the cutscenes, to express them and to have them talk. And that's fine, I don't have a problem with that, I understand. But I do feel like they should have and could have had more dragon moments with them, especially when they regained their aspectral powers. I would have preferred them regaining that not in their visage form, but in their aspect forms, like their dragon forms rather. Or when they helped us face Farak, it would have been better if we saw them doing dragon stuff instead. Much like when we fought Deathwing together, it just added to that spectacle of dragons fighting dragons that we needed more of. We got that with Alexstrasza fighting Raszageth, and Rathian fighting Raszageth too, but we needed more of that, and it kind of just stopped after the beginning. Additionally, I just think we needed for them to do more. We got bits of them around the start, like I said, and that was like the best bits with them, really. But what I feel like was our main cast for Dragonflight, and should have been at times, they should have shined more. It felt like others that weren't dragons, or were minor dragons, shined in their stead. I only really got the impression that Merithra, the new dragon aspect really stepping up, shined, I guess. While Rathian and Sibelian, again, did so much more than Abyssian ever did during that whole Black Dragon storyline. The Incarnates absolutely stole the show from them, and I guess that's a win for them against the aspects. I also feel that the family line, as I teased, was dropped way too much. Like, a lot. It didn't really become as apparent to me until I had it pointed out by a friend of mine of just how, when he blazed right through the quests, on how much family was just constantly iterated upon. I don't actually have an issue with that as a theme, but once you start making a drinking game out of it, and it becomes rather dark if you do it, don't do that, by the way. Don't. Just it's surreal just how weird things got with the dragon aspects. That they were a disappointment, and they really shouldn't have been during their own expansion. This should have been their time to shine, this should have been their moment, and it wasn't. And that's disappointing. When I'm more excited to see the mortals do stuff, and not the dragons, that's a problem, I think. At the very least, they got Rathian and Sibelian and Merithra, I'd say, right? And Kelagos, we'll throw him in there. Not much more to say now. Dragonflight wraps itself up quite nicely by having us tend to loose threads and loose ends. We're more or less congratulated for our deeds and a job well done by the newly formed aspects. You guys better do stuff. in Last Titan, just saying. Ohn'arhran has his talk with Vyranoth, and the Incarnates are officially ended, with him leaving with a warning to stay out of his way in his war against the Titans, and that the Harbinger, whom we know as Xal'Atath, of course she's not name dropped, has been given the Dark Heart to lure them in, so she's going to be doing her shenanigans soon. Someone he notes he doesn't trust, but will ultimately use. I really like Ohn'arhran a lot for that, and I can't wait to ultimately see him return. Such a refreshing villain who doesn't seem to be being manipulated and used by cosmic forces. Instead, it's him using them, and vice versa in a way. Neltharion returns after his nap in Ardenweald and gets his first kiss in World of Warcraft. Am I reading that right? Alright, well, kudos to him. Surprised it took this long, honestly, but out of all the characters in Duo to do it, Tyrande and Malfurion are the ones to do it. And also, we got a hint of what's to come in the future for our next saga with the Radiant Song and the likes of Thrall, Jaina, and others. And the hunt for Xal'Atath beginning with Khadgar sending Illyria out to find her. And warned by Locust Walker that this is the same song and warning from his own world of Karesh. So that's a plot point dropped about Dementius eating a world soul, alright. One thing I will credit Dragonflight on is it did a really fantastic job of wrapping up old and new storylines in each patch. Yeah, there were some flops and how they exactly handled it, but at the very least, there was conclusive arcs, which is rather rare for World of Warcraft to do. I feel like Mista Pandaria was the main expansion that handled that well. BFA, to some extent, I guess. While the Gilneas one is quite controversial, of course, it is controversial, but it was alright, and at least it was a hanging thread, and I like the stuff it did with Tess, but I'm a Tess fan, so of course. Do I wish the Dread Dragonflight had an arc? Yes. Do I wish that Thrall appeared more, and his old role of being Earthwarder and his friendship with the Aspects was relevant in the story? Yes. Do I wish the Alliance and Horde had a bigger role? Yes. Do I wish Chromatus play a major role in this expansion, given he's the first ever Kaiju combo dragon who would be the perfect boss and threat for the Dragonflights and Dracthyr to overcome? Absolutely yes. But maybe for Last Titan. But for the storylines that we did manage to get, faults and all, I'm glad that we got major wrap-ups for the stories that I didn't even know we really needed wrap-ups for. In conclusion to this, over hour-long video, good god, for Dragonflight. Dragonflight's story was definitely divisive, controversial, and missed out on some massive opportunities. It could have used way more dragons in its dragon-centric story, and the Incarnates needed far more screen time and maybe a bit of a better hint that the fire-loving Farak was to be our final villain. For every flopping failure, therein lies success though. There is certainly a diamond found in every rough. Walking away from Dragonflight, I will actually miss it, faults and all. When it got things right, it got things right. While it was not perfect, it didn't outrage me too much with what it told and with what it did. Except for Abyssian. Dragonflight was more on the gentler side, definitely, and lacked that grit that its predecessors had in abundance. It had wonderfully beautiful sights in its zones that I'll certainly look back on fondly, and revisiting with Machinima and other stuff and other projects will definitely be nice. I think calling it mid doesn't do Dragonflight a disservice. It more or less just had many waves of good and bad, but I do think it had a nasty habit of having very, very off conclusions with storytelling. For my own listings, if you care, it sits somewhere between Cataclysm and Legion. So above Cataclysm, under Legion, for me. Again, everyone has their own listings for the expansions in WoW. It comes very close to being up there with the greats, but it certainly doesn't reach it either, due to its failings. I think that the intention behind Dragonflight was most assuredly to give us a softer story, while setting up the darker ones for what's to come in the World Soul Saga, and maybe even beyond. I would still recommend anyone who's interested in Warcraft, old and new, to give Dragonflight a chance whenever they dive into the story. Tons of really good nuggets here and there, it's mostly a harmless narrative with a good number of hiccups. But that's my overall thoughts on Dragonflight. A very messy ride, but an enjoyable one that I'll miss. I think we'll look back on it and go, holy shit, things were so much more chill back then. Which I do think was intentional. All in all, Dragonflight gave me a lot of hope after a time in Warcraft where I was feeling very burnt, uncertain, and just down. But those are pretty much gone now after Dragonflight. It made me very happy. But what did you all think? Did you like Dragonflight? Did you hate Dragonflight? I want to know your overall thoughts. I hope I did a good job of talking about its story and other things. I like to do this more in World of Warcraft and other games in the coming future. But if you like this video, be sure to like it, be sure to subscribe, share, and all that jazz. You can also join me on my Discord where we talk about all sorts of stuff and things. We'd love to have you. And if you like me enough, you can support my Patreon like these amazing folks here. But until next time, my friends, bye ya!